Shelter Island as a provisioning plantation for Barbados. Both of these talks are available on our YouTube channel. Today's talk, entitled The Barbados-New York Connection, Enslavement and Exchange in the Middle Colonies, 1651 to 1750, represents a continuation and deepening of this discourse. In it, our speaker will explore the interconnected history of the colonial Atlantic world. As our director said, not only in the establishment of provisioning plantations, but also in establishing slavery, much like what was practiced in Barbados. Our speaker tonight, Dr. Seth Camel, is a resident of Brooklyn, New York. He is a founder and longtime director of Big Onion Walking Tours in New York City and is a fellow of the New York Academy of History. Seth has been a consultant on a variety of historical tourism projects, including Governor's Island, New York, the Presidio, San Francisco, Atlantic City, New Jersey, and the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia. I think he is also quite knowledgeable about the rum industry in Barbados. He has appeared on numerous television networks, and his on-camera work has been nominated for 13 local New York Emmy Awards, quite a feat. I must also add that Seth has been a patron of the Shilson Memorial Library for a number of years and has generously shared information which he thinks would benefit other researchers. He can now be considered a friend of the library, a friend of the Shilson. Seth, over to you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, great. So my only notes by way of introduction, I'd like to thank the Barbados Museum History Group as well as the Barbados Genealogical Society, absolutely Museum Director Alessandra Cummins, Librarian Harriet Pierce, the staff of the museum who have been absolutely wonderful, and also those of the Barbados National Archives. My research I couldn't have done without them. But also two people in our live audience here today. First, Dr. Tara Innes and Dr. Jeff Ward for their ongoing support. And really couldn't have done a lot of this without the assistance and help of the people in this room. But we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and we build our scholarship, and we honor their contributions to our understanding of history. And I want to acknowledge the recent loss of 3 Barbadian historians and scholars in recent months. Dr. Carl Watson, Mr. Trevor Marshall, and Professor Pedro Welsh, all of whom will be deeply missed by I think everyone here, both in person and online. My presentation is about enslavement and exchange in the Middle Colonies, 1651 to 1750, a tremendously long time period. And I want to begin, there we go, by saying I'll be talking about 5 general areas: a brief introduction, some of the shared sites of plantations, the Barbados-New York slave trade, and the New York, New Jersey provisioning of Barbados, and then wrap things up and hopefully have a Q&A afterwards. But I have this picture of the George Washington House here because for so many people, the connections between Barbados and America, or even Barbados and New York, start and end with George Washington, who lived here as a young man with his half-brother, and who is essentially becomes the first president of the United States in New York in 1789. And when I show this picture to people in the States, they're like, George Washington was in Barbados? And we talk about George Washington here in Barbados, go off like he had a wife after he left, before he became president. And so much of that flowed through New York. But what we need to think about also is language. I'm going to use much of the language of the 17th and 18th centuries when it is in a direct quote. What's the difference between a plantation and a manor? Post-American Civil War, Northern American sensibility. A manor is a plantation. Both a manor and a plantation are social economic systems of primarily enslaved labor and indentured servitude to generate wealth for an owner or for a foreign place. And in 1700, the most considerable plantations of the English in America are the Carolinas, Nova Scotia, Jamaica, Barbados, Bermuda, and the larger middle colonies of North America, but also New England and what I call the Upper South. The middle colonies are, in fact, New York and New Jersey. As I'll discuss later, New Jersey is split in two between East and West New Jersey, one looking to the south and one looking to New York. And New England, I'm from New England, is a creature all unto itself. It's a whole other story. But this language is really, I think, very important to think about how it evolves and changes over time. Richard Ford and Philip Lee create a map in 1682 of Barbados. And what we have are colored stars of the people that I researched. Every single one of these stars, and I believe there are more, are all families, plantation owners, people, or direct connections between Barbados and New York and New Jersey. We had Frederick Philipse, we have Lewis Morris, who are of the Hudson Valley in New Jersey. The blue, all in a row, and one way off to the side, is going to be Shelter Island. We have the New Jersey proprietors. And then we have additional plantations run by or managed by the Shelter Island proprietors. One of the reasons there have been researched so much is that they are the most prominent. And the black dot, which is the Newton Plantation and the burial ground, direct ties to the African burial ground in New York, both in terms of history and questions of preservation, which are not going to be discussed today, but I do believe are deeply important topics. And possibly my favorite is the dark green and completely unknown Elizabeth Downs. This is William Franklin, who I'll come to at the very end. So if this is Philip Lee of 1682, whoops, we missed one. This is Philip Lee of 1690. Apologies. Exact same stars in the New York, New Jersey area. Yellow is Shelter Island. The red are the East New Jersey proprietors of Berry, Kingsland, and Sanford. We have the dark green, which is Perth Amboy, the port of New Jersey. We have the dark blue, which is the New York colony of the Merchant Center, African and Jewish cemeteries. And we also have the Morris clan, because there were so many Morrises, they're almost impossible to count. This is a tremendous migration and flow. And one of the most important aspects for me is that quite often when these people were in Barbados, they said they were of New Jersey or New York. When they were in New York, they said they were of Barbados. They did not leave Barbados. They flowed back and forth continuously. And one of the images I have later is the last will and testament, because every time one of these people got on a ship, they wrote a new will. And quite often we'll come upon the same person with 6 or 8 or 10 wills in a 5-year time period. And to study how those evolve is to study the transformation of their wealth, their empire, and the consequences of the world. So I apologize for my double click, but we're going to start with Shelter Island, the 1650s. Come on. This is the Constant Plantation. I went to take a picture of the sign yesterday, Constant, on the side of the road. It's been taken down. The land is for sale in 2 large blocks, it appears. Constant and Nathaniel Sylvester come to Barbados sometime before September 1645, because that is their first land transaction. And that comes out of the Barbados National Archives. Nathaniel was importing enslaved people on a ship that was Dutch. These men were not English. Their parents were English. They spoke English. They're born in the Netherlands. So already that transformation is beginning of where are you from? They are technically Dutch. They are gifting constant plantation sugar to the governor of Connecticut in 1649. And this is absolutely crucial. At the same time, Constant Sylvester is piecing together his plantation, and his brother Nathaniel is piecing together a plantation nearby. They are not denizened until 1660. They are not considered truly, they're never considered truly English, but they're not considered residents of England until 1660, when this time period is all past. But these are some of the most important figures for the first settlement of Barbadians in the middle colonies. They have a purchase. All four of these individuals, Captain Thomas Middleton, Mr. Constant Sylvester, Captain Sylvester, and Ensign John Booth, are from Barbados. They buy Shelter Island from Stephen Goodyear of New London, Connecticut, because Shelter Island and the entire eastern half of Long Island, if you're familiar with Long Island, was Connecticut. If you're familiar with Long Island, it comes in, it creates a bay with the mainland of America. There's a line called the Nassau-Suffolk County line. Nassau County was Dutch, Suffolk County was English and Connecticut. So this isn't even a New York land transaction yet, it's a New England transaction. In their multi-point document, there's no mention of the labor. There is mention of building a water mill for grinding, which is an evidence of their intent to provision. It is unfortunate that Shelter Island archives are not openly available. I think there's a tremendous amount of material to be seen, and I hope someday to be able to access more of them. But the little bits and pieces that I'm going to share with you are telling, I think, a very interesting story, especially around the question of enslavement. This is an 1889 map of Shelter Island. 1889, New York abolishes slavery in 1827. So we abolished slavery in 1827. 1889, we're still marking on the map in the square, slave cemetery. They bought this island in 1651 for 1,600 pounds of sugar, valued at 15 pounds. It doesn't mean anything to us, 15 pounds. I mean, 15 pounds is a bowl of soup today. But what is 15 pounds in this colony for 8,000 acres of land compared to Barbados? Let's have a quick look at Sir Poynting's Moor. 1647. 150 acres of land in Barbados is 450 pounds versus 8,000 acres being 15 pounds. 20 English servants, transport and outfit, 200 pounds. Purchasing, and this is their language, 40 Negroes to purchase an outfit, 880 pounds. The important stills, coppers, and ironworks for grinding and boiling sugar, making sugar, molasses, rum, the profit. 20 oxen, 10 cows, farm animals, 500 pounds, 3,000 pounds to clear the land, an investment of 5,510 pounds. And Sir Moore knew he would not have the chance of turning a profit for 3 years. Barbados was not a monoculture, but the vast majority of arable land is dedicated to profit-driven crops. As I'm sure many of you know, ginger, pepper, cotton, indigo. At least he didn't try tobacco. And by then he knew tobacco was pretty poor down here. But sugar was the crucial crop. But I just put this in to give you an idea of why one would invest so much so far away to provision. The land was unbelievably cheap. The climate was completely different. The issue will be, how do we get it here? Nathaniel Sylvester, when he dies, is in possession of 24 enslaved people, including 4 family units. Here's one of the things I don't understand about the official Sylvester Manor history. Jacaro and Hannah, along with their daughter Hope, who were previously held by his wife, Nathaniel Sylvester's wife Griselle, before their marriage and brought from Barbados. Supposedly, they came and their ship was wrecked and they washed up on shore with nothing. Where did these enslaved people come from? Were they washed up on shore with them and just not recorded? Did they come on a different voyage? Were they on a separate ship? We don't know. But some of the enslaved came with them from Barbados. The families were split up. I believe that Shelter Island is the first example of matrilineal generational enslavement in North America. I think it predates Virginia. I know it predates South Carolina. But I think this is the first example of matrilineal, multi-generational enslavement. And again, I don't know what records exist beyond what I've been able to find, but here are the breaking up of the family and the splitting them up and sending them to the generations of the plantocracy. When Grizzle passes in 1685, she grants her Bible and her Negro woman called Hope, the daughter of Jacaro and Hannah and his wife. This is Hope's third transfer in her lifetime, within 3 generations of the Sylvester family. So Hope is transported as a child from Barbados. Don't know if she's born here or if she's born in Africa. She's transported to Shelter Island, and this is her third transfer between 1651 and 1685. Too fast. Wrong way. Unchanged practices. 1693. Benjamin Lamadou, French Huguenot, is attending church and is enthralled by this vision of 2 young women being rowed across the church in a barge with a canopy and 6 Negro slaves rowing it. The vision haunted him to the point where he married Patience within a year. 1783, 40 years later. The only difference is the barge is now being rowed by 4 well-matched Negroes. Unchanged for 40 years of how the Sylvester family goes to church. Rowed across the bay, because there's no church in Shelter Island, by, I have to imagine, based on this, 4 well-matched Negroes. It doesn't say they're well attired. Their height and their stature are meant to appear uniform. I'm sure their uniforms were also similar, if not identical. And I love the little dig from the clergy member. She showed the Mrs. Sylvester shows up in a silk velvet mantle inwrought with gold. And the clergyman says, "I'm afraid you are proud of your fine barge and rich dress." "Oh, no, sir. I'm proud of my fine linen. Just not the gold I wear." I see it's very awkward. This is ongoing for so very long. The left is the original house, built 1737, and the right is how the house stands now. The family still owns 236 acres, 11 generations. They have an educational farm, they have an educational center. They are doing work on the African burial ground, the slave burial ground. They are doing work on trying to investigate more of the history of the people who built this manor, but the actual information is sparse, and I hope they can find more. But because they are so well known, I use them as a foundation to talk about some of the things that are not well known. And I want to move on to a really interesting controversy. Why is it named Shelter Island? Many generations have said, oh, it's named Shelter Island because Shelter Island sheltered the Quakers who had experienced discrimination on Barbados. They fled Barbados, they sought shelter. Shelter Island is the name that it was before the Sylvesters purchased it. The fourth investor, and Ensign Booth worked on behalf of this man, was John Rouse. Thomas Rouse. Thomas Rouse sells his portion of Sylvester Manor and Shelter Island to buy Clifton Hall Great House. And Clifton Hall Great House is where he hosts the great Quaker preacher George Fox in 1671. And Fox very famously preaches from that porch to the people of Barbados about the Quaker faith. He marries Margaret Fell, the daughter of the founding members of the Quaker faith. Here's the problem. George Fox claims that he coins the phrase Quakerism, and the religion doesn't begin until roughly 1655, 4 years after the purchase of the island. George Fox is not saying, I'm a Quaker, when the Sylvesters and Rouse are buying Shelter Island. So I think that it has to do perhaps with they are opposed to the parliamentary system during the English Civil War. Perhaps they're looking for a place to provision. But a lot of the underhistory is, I think, based in a very tight time period that doesn't quite line up. Rouse himself, despite being a Quaker, refers to himself as a major until his death. And this is what the plantation sold for in 1810 to Robert Haynes, 35,000 pounds, 365 acres, and 151 enslaved workers. Moving up the Hudson Valley, these are, based in 1712, the 6 plantations of the Hudson Valley. Number 6 is the southern tip of the Bronx. So that would be Manhattan, just across that striped waterway. The sharp lines cutting up on the side over here to the, let me use the pointer. These sharp lines along here are the border of Connecticut, and this is a jagged coastline for the shoreline of Long Island Sound. Van Cortlandt, Stephanus Van Cortlandt, number 1, a mere 86,000 acres. Philipsburg Manor, Frederick Philipse, Barbados-born, 52,000 acres. And this is the number of enslaved workers they have on their plantations in 1712. Scarsdale, now a prominent town in Westchester. Caleb Heathcote, English-born. Pelham, Thomas Pell. He had significant economic difficulties and had to sell off approximately 44,000 acres of his estate. Fordham, best known for Fordham University now, is disbanded. And Morrisania of Lewis Morris, 2,000 acres. Do not be deceived by that small number of acreage. Again, it's all relative. I mean, 2,000 acres in Barbados would be insane. So it's all a relative amount. Van Cortlandt, Phillips, Heathcote, and Morris are all related by marriage before 1700. So with Fordham disbanded, Pelham, of his 6,000 acres, the rest of this land is essentially owned by one extended family. Lewis Morris, in Barbados, 1665, writes a letter to John Bowne of Flushing. And John Bowne is very famous because he writes the Flushing Remonstrance, which is an important article for the freedom of religion in America. Incredibly important. His house is still standing in New York City. But he writes as early as 1665, claiming he is interested in purchasing a large quantity of land. Long before his arrival, he's talking and writing and corresponding about this. In the same way that Sylvester is doing that with the governor of Connecticut, who then sets up the sale with Goodyear for Shelter Island. The gifting of the sugar, the letters of communication, these were not spontaneous actions. These are well-planned business transactions. Lewis Morris the Younger is the only son of Richard Morris and Sarah Poole. The Morrises owned Apes Hill at this time. And this is the Younger, his portrait. I say birthplace contested. And this is why I really want to get back into the Barbados National Archives. I believe he was born in Barbados. History books claim that he was born in New York, but without evidence. And I have found one piece of evidence that he was born here, and I think I know where to find the second, but I have to just get access to it. He inherits Tinton Manor and Morrisania with approximately 60 enslaved people. The difficulty is that they owned that large plantation in southern Westchester. They owned what I will describe in a minute as Tinton Manor. Based on the seasons and the workload, enslaved workers transferred from place to place. During harvest time, they shifted to the Westchester plantation. During other times, they shifted to the New Jersey plantation. The numbers are only estimates, but remember this number 60, because we'll use that for New Jersey in a minute. He is the Chief Justice of the New York Supreme Court and the colonial governor of New Jersey. This is a 1676 sketch of Tinton Manor, which is an iron mine. And I've highlighted, because it's very hard to see, where the slave quarters were. As you would in Barbados, near to, yet downwind of the main house. This is a border map, and this line here, right here that I'm highlighting, is the border of, this is being West New Jersey, this being East New Jersey, and West New Jersey being oriented towards Quaker, Pennsylvania, and out of the middle colonies. As a proprietary colony, we had massive land holdings and the idea of appealing to people to come, work my land, you will get land in exchange, indentured servitude. But you see the giant Morris County, which the Morrises essentially owned. And you see the other arrow, Barbados Neck, a small portion of the proprietary colony owned by Captain John Berry of Barbados. So how many of you here in our audience have direct ties to New York or New Jersey? For those on camera, about 10. How many of you have ever heard of New Barbados? You two don't count. How many of you ever heard of Hackensack? Same place. So he actually named his colony for Barbados. Oh, come on. So the Morrises come from Tintern, Wales, where they're a mining family. They come to Barbados, 3 brothers. One becomes a privateer, one becomes essentially a plantation owner, and one opens a clay mine. And they're mining clay for the sugaring process to be able to do clayed sugar for export. They then purchase an iron mine in New Jersey using generations of mining knowledge from Wales. I'm not saying this is the only one. This is the only one that I've found of a colonial place influencing the name of the home empire. In the late 18th century, the mountain that the Morrises came from is renamed Barbados Hill in Wales. So you can go to see the great 15th century Tintern Abbey. The relic still stands from Barbados Hill. I'd love to know if there are other examples, but this is the only one that I've found. Their neighbors, the Philipse. This is from a court case. Owner Frederick Philipse, his master, are put on trial for illegal slave trade. These are believed to be the first enslaved people to come to the region, not New York City, but to Westchester, a little to the north. The ship left for Angola in Guinea. They received 140 Negroes. They landed at Barbados. 23 were sick, 9 remained. 8 of them were put ashore with a longboat near Rye, New York, and delivered to Mr. Frederick Philipse, his son, and the other being a Negro boy who was sent to the city. Jury of your peers, are you guilty of illegal slave trade? No. What is the crime of illegal slave trade? Denying the crown their money per head of an enslaved person being brought in. The jury said no. What did these enslaved workers build for the Philipse family? These 2 manors. Their city house, which is now in New York City of Yonkers, and the mill and the country house of their upper colony estate. These are built at the same time period, and enslaved labor, most likely some of these 8 enslaved workers who'd gone from Africa to Barbados to New York, working on all of these. The second son of Frederick Philipse, not sure where he's born, to be honest, absolutely no idea. As the second son, and the one who, until his older brother sort of suddenly passes away, was not expected to inherit anything, was expanding the family trading businesses to Jamaica, Martinique, Curacao, Suriname, Madagascar, and Europe. When his brother and then his father die, he inherits all of the family land, approximately 250,000 acres. He is known for partnering with both Gentile and Jewish merchants and ship owners, but as a historian, what's really incredible is he had OCD like I've never seen. His inventory upon his death goes on for pages. And these are some of the pages. First of all, the large one on the right-hand side is incredibly useful because it talks about the names of the enslaved workers broken down by men, women, boys, girls, right above the cattle and oxen. On the manor, the upper manor, the one with the mill. But also you have in his inventory the fact that he's owed 26 pounds, 19 shillings for renting out his Negro man, John. Again, in the urban environment in New York, quite often when there is not work on the plantation, you rent out your enslaved workers and they head into the city and quite often end up being temporary dock workers, unloading and unloading ships, and then the owner receiving the wages. We also have on the bottom, what is inside the Negro house? This is what I mean about his OCD. 2 old whipsaws, an old broken iron pot, and some rubbish. There are so many notations of the sizes of piles of rubbish this man kept. It's kind of bizarre. What is very, very telling, though, is in the barn are 67 pairs of iron shackles. So shackles to enshackle enslaved workers. Those are the details that are hidden inside his inventory. I'll get this working one time. Frederick Philipse, the second lord, is born here at the Springhead Plantation. His parents are Philip Philipse, or Frederick Philipse I's brother, and Maria Sparks, who is the daughter of Governor John Sparks. He's raised by his uncle, and when his relative, Adolphus, dies in 1750, he inherits everything. He dies 1 year later, and his son, Frederick II, gives the land to Frederick III, and that is 205,000 acres of land. All prime Hudson Valley, magnificent farmland. It's divided evenly among his 3 children, the smallest one getting 53,000 acres. I know it doesn't add up to 205, some was sold off to pay debt. The true, again, I mentioned wills and how you have to do like one every 3 weeks. The true final will of Frederick Philipse itemizes his enslaved workers, but what I'd like to point out, really, I think, is one of the few examples that I found, the Indian woman called Hannah. Indigenous enslavement. Quite often, my research and the research of so many of us is talking about African enslavement. As late as 1751, there is still the enslavement of indigenous North Americans on these plantations. And he's separating them by race, Indian versus what he's calling Negro. There are in total 30 enslaved, 7 go to his wife, and 23 are given to his son. New Jersey. I already gave a little bit of this away, but New Barbados is now called Hackensack. John Berry, Captain John Berry, comes to Barbados from England. He's incredibly active in a number of business ventures. His history is still deeply hidden. And the next image will show you part of the reason why. He donates the land in Hackensack that was the green. He donates the church, and this is his great-grandson's house, which is still standing. This house, his great-grandson, John Berry's older brother, is Abraham Berry, who is the first mayor of a city in New York called Williamsburg. So he's the mayor of Williamsburg before the consolidation of New York. So Berry Street in Brooklyn is named for the Berry family of New Barbados of Barbados. Part of the reason why his information is why the Berry family is so obscured, that's the handwriting. This is his will. John Berry will go to be almost 100 years old. And this bottom boxed corner is where he gives his daughter, Susan Berry Springham. Are folks familiar with the colonial doctor, Dr. John Springham? He seems to have been somewhat prominent in medical science around 1700, 1710. But he gives his daughter his Barbados plantation of Staple Grove. So they owned Staple Grove at the time. One of the pieces here in this museum is this map of Staple Grove. Yes, it's a century later, but it's very uncommon to have to be able to juxtapose the history with a map that shows where the windmill is and the slave housing right here. One thing that makes me as a historian absolutely crazy is how land is recorded. And I also have it just to highlight how everything is recorded by your neighbors by their name and not necessarily landmarks. Can I just say, no. I understand, but it's so hard. But this wonderful map is here in the collection here at the museum. This is my favorite story of how it all comes together before I move to provisioning. Elizabeth Downes Franklin. Has anyone watched the TV series Franklin about Benjamin Franklin in Paris with his grandson named Temple, who is the son of Benjamin's illegitimate son, William? So William Franklin was a serious loyalist who goes to England and is named the governor of the colony of New Jersey, and at the ball, one of the many balls, meets a fine Barbadian lady by the name of Elizabeth Downes, marries her at the wedding of the season, 1765, takes her to this house in the bottom center where he is the colonial governor, the last surviving British colonial governor's mansion of the original 13 states or colonies. He is arrested, he's imprisoned, he's exchanged, he goes to England, he seems to forget his wife and remarries. But after the war, buys her a memorial in Trinity Church, the great church at Wall Street and Broadway, what we call Episcopal, what you will call Anglican. But here's this incredible picture of Queen Elizabeth II at Bel Air or Duke's Plantation in 1966. Why is that there? That's the birthplace of Elizabeth Downes. The ability to tie these places together through physical structures makes it come alive in a way that I think that me and my academic footnotes don't. And when I pulled these things together, I was like, wow, this is really kind of cool. But let's shift altogether to exchange. Print is tiny, but these are all of the ships from New York, Boston, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania that went to Barbados in the year 1686. New York is 18, Boston is 20, Connecticut 4, Pennsylvania 9. But what's important is that a lot of people forget New York because we have this incredible New England trade that dies. And there's this really interesting period between 1690 and 1760 where New York is dominant. And then Pennsylvania rises. And after the American Revolution or the American War, what happens? Pennsylvania falls. New York rises again. But if you can read this and see the incredible amount of materials and the diversity of materials from New York as opposed to the other places, just flour. Let's take flour. New York ships 83 tons plus 240 barrels, 569 half barrels, 160 casks, plus 2 tons of mixed peas and flour. Compared to Boston, 1,000 pounds of flour and 80 barrels of peas and flour. Nothing from Connecticut and 6 tons from Pennsylvania. Other than building materials, where Boston is sending more and the others send none, New York is essentially significantly ahead in terms of numbers from just about everywhere. And I'd like to thank Dr. Ward for arranging music to accompany my talk. A little easier to read. New York, 1715 to 1716, to Barbados, Curacao, and Jamaica. A total of 216 ships left New York that year. 104 went to the West Indies. Only 20 went to Britain. 65% of all West Indies ships are these listed here, to these 3 islands. What I think is most important is that where it says 36 trips, 1,686 tons, that is the reported amount of weight that each ship could carry. In reality, much more on board. I wish they had itemized, but 1,155 tons of general provisions, almost 1,600 bushels of grain, 160 bushels of oats, fish, beer, oil, onions, lumber, sheep and horses, tobacco, again, terrible tobacco grown here, import it, tar, linen, 11 masts. If it says made here, it was made in New York. So the hats are made in New York for Curacao, the buttons are made in New York, but the candles and the masts, we don't know. It doesn't say made here. They could have been transshipped from one place to another coming down here. 3 bags of feathers to Jamaica, luxury items. 2 boxes of sucads. Sucads are candied orange peel, luxury items. Cinnamon and clove. We don't grow that in New York. That's transshipped. But lots of this is just 1 year from one port. When it comes to the transshipping and the shipping of enslaved workers into New York, the blue line on the bottom are the numbers of voyages, never exceeding about 14. The jagged line are the numbers of enslaved persons coming into New York. The spikes, the 5 spikes, are large ships coming directly from Africa. So in these large spikes, when we have, for example, in 1716, it comes to 500, approximately 150 to 170 are coming on 2 ships directly from the west coast of Africa. If I had taken Africa out, it'd be an artificially flat line. But I want to discuss in total enslavement. I add the 1741 slave uprising because the number completely collapses. Because in 1741, we quite often talk about war and trouble on the islands or something happening in Africa. In 1741, we had a massive suspected slave uprising that led to the deportation, torture, burning, execution of dozens of enslaved persons and some white indentured workers that completely shut down New York, and a total fear of imported new hostile workers. The slave trade stopped. Our records, however, also stop in 1743. So I did not arbitrarily choose these years. These are the years that the records have allowed. A few specific examples. Come on. So Antigua, Barbados, Bermuda, Curacao, I threw in South Carolina. Where did enslaved people from the Caribbean and Carolina come from? Primarily Jamaica. In 1715 to 1725, it was mostly Barbados. Barbados declines, Jamaica rises, both in terms of the number of voyages and the number of enslaved people. But really, Barbados is second in terms of point of origin, at least from this part of the world, and with an average of 6 people per ship. These are not large vessels of many enslaved people. We're talking about 6 average, 2.5, 2 from Bermuda. These are sloops and schooners with cargo that included a small number of enslaved people, along with the molasses, rum, and sugar coming from the island, and indigo and cotton. Import of enslaved to New York. Okay, 112 voyages, 16.7% of all voyages. 16.7% of all enslaved people came from Barbados going to New York, but 22.7% of all enslaved people from the West Indies, and the average number, Barbados is on par. The 3 largest people involved from the New York area, Adolphus Philipse of Phillipsburg Manor, responsible for 16 voyages and 66 enslaved people coming in. The Kruger family, who were the New York agents for Edward Lascelles and Earl Lascelles, first Earl Lascelles of Barbados. Peter Barbary, who is a French Huguenot, and Barbadians themselves. 10 voyages, 57 enslaved. Total, 8 voyages, 43 enslaved from Barbados. They also imported enslaved workers from other places. The Jewish investment in all of the voyages, pardon the typo, 0.5%, 35 of all total voyages. The Jewish investment in Barbados voyages, a total of 2 out of 112. Jewish slave ship owners or partial owners were responsible for bringing in 0.73% of all enslaved to New York and 0.46 of all enslaved from Barbados. This is only New York and Barbados, not New York and North America, but there are, as I'll show you in a minute, tremendous interconnections of Jewish and non-Jewish shippers, but the Jewish role in the process is actually surprisingly, at least to me as a Jewish historian, low. This is what I spent 2 years looking at. The Hamilton, the top one, was owned by John Moore of Barbados, Stephen Delancey, and Peter Barbary of New York. This is what they brought from Barbados. 11 Negroes going to New Jersey. Separate listings because separate taxation categories. Below it was the Charlotte, owned by Henry Cuyler, Moses and Jacob Levy, 2 Jewish owners. This is what they carried to New York, and they also transshipped cacao and other things. This is one of the 2 ships that was partly Jewish owned that carried enslaved people to New York. Comparing that to Adolphus Philipse, working alone with his ship, the Philipsburg, returning iron, old iron back to the mill to be remixed in with New Jersey iron to resell again. One of the reasons why we historians should not completely fear AI, there are lots of ways to spell Barbados that AI can't find. So I feel positive. One ship, the Catherine, John Watts, the Shywers of New Barbados. It's multiple voyages. This picture is not the Charlotte, but it is an accurate representation of a 1740s slave ship. Departs Gabon with 257 enslaved on April 21st, 1733. Arrives in Brazil, 19 die, 100 years old. Carlisle Bay refuses entry due to illness. It arrives in Perth Amboy with 109 survivors, where it sits for a month. Because if you arrive in New Jersey with enslaved workers, there's no tax. If you wait a month and keep them on board in that ship and then bring them to New York, they're being transshipped from New Jersey and not imported, therefore no tax. Otherwise, you're paying £4 per head. So leaving people on shipboard saved some money. It then goes back to Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and departs from Madeira with wheat and beeswax and bread and 3 of the enslaved workers. So imagine being transported from the west coast of Africa to Brazil, to Barbados, to New Jersey, to New York, to New Jersey, back off the coast of Africa. I can't imagine. I mean, Peter Barberi, born in France, owns the Hamilton with John Moore and Stephen Delancey. And John Moore, he also owns the Francis and Catherine. These are a few of their voyages. John Moore works with Peter Moore of Barbados, and their ship is the Peter and John, so I'm assuming they're both of Barbadian heritage. Stephen Delancey, born in France, is a merchant, father of Oliver Delancey. He owns the Abigail with Adolphus Philipse, who I mentioned before, and Moses and Jacob Weavy and Frank, so I mentioned as well, and Jacobus Van Cortlandt, who's the brother-in-law of Frederick Phillips. Again, it's all one big happy family. Adolphus Philipse owns these other ships and was one of the most prolific slave traders. Now, mind you, my chart before was only about enslavement from Barbados. This is giving you a broader picture of many Caribbean islands as well as direct from Africa. I highlight the sloop Abigail for a reason, moving towards the conclusion here. This is Abigail. Billa Abigail Levy Franks, born in London. Her father was one of the most powerful merchants in London. I actually have records for another time, about a ship that he brought to Barbados and the amount of goods on it, including what I believe may be an early set of the 10 Commandments for either a courthouse or the synagogue. But Moses Raphael Levy's second wife was a woman named Grace Mears of Jamaica. Grace Mears was the grandmother of Gershom Mendes Satius. Gershom Mendes Satius is the rabbi present at the inauguration of George Washington in New York in 1789. So again, all these things are beginning to come together. Her daughter is Phila Franks Delancey. These were modern, secular people, and she wrote beautiful letters with her son, David, and Naphtali, mostly Naphtali, about it's so wonderful, we live in New York, and these Delanceys are across the street, and they invite me to tea, and we go to their clubs and do all these things. I like them so much more than we like the Jews. And these letters go, and then all of a sudden it turns out, oh my God, our daughter married one of them. Her daughter marries a Delancey, one of the first prominent Jewish Christian intermarriages in American history. But the ship is named for her. The letters are spectacular. Her grandson is the governor of Tobago and the Chief Justice of Bahamas, and her great-grandson fights in the Battle of Waterloo. But I just like the idea that we can take a ship name and see who it's for. I want to end with this. This is New York City after the American Revolution. This is, here on the left, the big building flying the American flag, the Tontine Coffee House, the birthplace of the New York Stock Exchange. And that is the focal point of this painting. We have the old merchant buildings. We have the stepped roofs that kind of look Dutch, like some of the old buildings in Bridgetown. Well, we have commonalities there. We have the masts of the East River, and if your eyes are good, way in the distance, you can see Brooklyn, where I live. But why am I showing you this? Because we have enslavement hidden in plain sight. We have here and here, here and here, the barrels, and 4 men wearing red, the uniform of enslaved men out for hire in colonial and early Republic New York. I mentioned the owner was owed 26 pounds for hiring him out. These are here in the foreground of the founding of the New York Stock Exchange are 4 enslaved workers unloading the barrels that mostly came from the West Indies or Madeira. And sometimes we can stop and look at these pieces of art and find hidden in the corners or in the foreground the history that I'm looking for and the history and the legacy of what it is that I've been talking about for about the last hour. And I want to end on a slight joke. Does anyone know what a tontine is? So think about this as the founding side of the New York Stock Exchange. A tontine comes from Sicily, and we all put an equal amount of money in a can together. And the last one of us alive gets all the money. There are no rules about who lives or dies. It's Sicilian. What a place to have found the New York Stock Exchange. But on that note, I would like to welcome any questions, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. That really was very illuminating. And, as you mentioned, I think there's a lot to unpack and definitely room for some more presentations in the future.
Well, thank you.
I think. So we do have some time for questions, both from our audience members here with us in person, but also online. Do we have any in person at the moment? You'd like to ask a question? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. Can you hear me, Zach?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. I do have one question, actually. You mentioned earlier about the usage of AI and its inability perhaps to, is that what you said? The inability for it to decipher between the variations of how to spell Barbados. Have you been able to utilize AI at all to hasten your research? Because I've noticed at one point when you're looking at the old handwriting in wills, which is literally indecipherable, sometimes because of penmanship, the faint, documents and passage of time. Is AI able to perhaps hasten that research now? No, Tara's saying no.
I don't.
Don't see why not. To me, it seems that AI could actually just read it now and tell you everything. Take the fun out of it.
I will tell you, I have not used it, nor do I plan on using AI, for one basic reason. I think that people that research and write history deserve proper credit. And one of the great downfalls of a lot of AI is it becomes public information as if the computer found it out of the ether and no one actually spent their literal blood, sweat, and tears finding it themselves. At this point in time, no. Oh yeah, you can talk to Tracy about how much fun it was. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Delancey, you mentioned, did they live on Delancey Street in New York, Manhattan?
Actually, the Delancey Street that I mentioned, did they live on Delancey Street in Manhattan? That was the basically road to the center of their plantation. There is a street in the Lower East Side off the East River called Division Street, which divided to the south the land of Colonel Henry Rutgers, the Revolutionary colonel, and ultimately Rutgers University family and others who were very active in terms of New Jersey slave trade. The other side were the Delanceys, who were the essentially colonial governors for the English. So there was not a lot of love shared for many years between the two, but Orchard Street in the Lower East Side was the footpath to the Delancey's apple orchard. All of our streets in that part of the old city are named for many of these figures. Yes. Yes. So we have another, and I'll say something that I forgot to mention before. Please, your question first. Of course.
Thank you. This is just a curiosity. You mentioned hired out slaves wearing uniforms, and I'm just wondering if you came across slaves and what did they wear?
Well, I do know that the majority of slaves that are hired out would have been able-bodied men and would be wearing a red dyed cloth called Ossenberg or Osenberg, depending on the spelling. One of the interesting things that I have found, and is a different topic, is that according to the English Crown, it could only be manufactured on the English Isles, and it was stamped with a special stamp, and it was used throughout the colonies as rough-hewn, heavy cloth, very durable for enslaved workers. I believe that there was a small Ossenberg manufacturing center in New Jersey, but I haven't been able to trace that yet. But it was a combination of flax as well as other fabrics that made for a very distinct fabric, easily identified, especially when dyed bright red. Yeah, I mentioned early on that I said, I forgot to include this, my apologies, when Perils of speaking without notes. I said, please remember the number 60 for the Morris enslaved people at Tinton. John Berry owned 32 human workers. According to a historian in New Jersey, at that time period, there were a maximum of 120 enslaved people in the entire colony of New Jersey. These two men were in possession of 92 of them. The majority were in the possession of Barbadians, and beyond that, I know that a man named Samuel Edsall was in possession of 9, if not more. So when we talk about the role of enslavement in places like New Jersey and New York, the significant large number of Barbadian enslavement tied to plantations, not the urban enslavement that I ended with, is actually absolutely crucial. So that clicked in my head, I forgot to tell you that bit, so sorry.
Yeah, question. Looking at the provisioning role towards the plantations in the Caribbean, were they owned by the same people, or was it a totally independent venture that was selling back here? It seems as if we produce sugar, they send down the stuff in order to keep the plantation there. Was families like LaSalle's and stuff like that, were they owning on both sides of that equation?
It's a great question. The LaSalle's and many families used merchants and merchant provisioners dedicated to their plantations. So one of the differences in Shelter Island is that Shelter Island was specific provisioning from Shelter Island to Constant and Carmichael plantations and Clifton Hall. However, the New Jersey model was much larger, and you had a large number of farming that brought people down into the provisioning goes into Perth Amboy and then headed over, which reminds me of the one slide that just didn't appear. I'm going to go back and show you this one really important slide. I apologize. I had clicker trouble. Because Javon, your question reminded me, this slide was really important and it didn't appear about this whole New Jersey history. This one, you didn't see this? No, okay. My memory's not completely shot. This is the difference. Shelter Island was, I own the land, give me the food. This is a Berkeley and Carteret. You may know these names from Carolinas. Well, Carteret was also part of the Royal Africa Company, the only original founding member of the Royal Africa Company to ever set foot on the continent of Africa. This is the 1664 concession agreement for the proprietors. Highlights. And this is what makes New Jersey unique. For every able servant that he shall carry with him, armed and provisioned aforesaid, and arriving there, the quantity of 150 acres English measure. I hold the land. I convince some of you to come. For every able-bodied male, I get 150 acres. Keep going here. Weaker servant or slave, female or male, exceeding the age of 14 years, I get an additional 75 acres. At the end of term, every Christian servant, meaning white indentured, you get 75 acres. This was absolutely crucial to the story. I'm sorry that the slide got skipped with the technology here. But this is absolutely crucial. In 1664, we are allocating the land for, Siobhan, your provisioning based on who I can entice. So what happens in Barbados? Come to Barbados, work my land, I will give you land. There's no land to give. You end up in the streets of Bridgetown, you end up shipped off to Jamaica, you end up shipped off somewhere else. I mean, I can't believe as a New Yorker I'm gonna say this. Come to the beautiful place of New Jersey. You'll get your land. But they're differentiating it. Again, 1664, there's absolutely no assumption of enslavement ending with the next generation. This is another example of multi-generational matrilineal enslavement that will continue in perpetuity. New Jersey did not want free blacks. So anyhow, your question prompted that, so I really thank you. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. I am motivated by two reference points, and that is 1664, as you just brought it up, because that would have followed after the Barbados Slave Code of 1661, which you didn't mention, and then the reference to George Washington and his brother coming to Barbados and taking back two very important acts of Parliament to America.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the 1652 Barbados Peace Charter that was signed in Austin, and also the 1661 Slave Code.
Yes.
Which then influenced America greatly. And so I'm very interested in your presentation. And while you were making your presentation, I'm thinking, which section of Barbados that need to hear this from you as we advance towards 1627. So which is the 400th anniversary, if the documented history of Barbados is correct. And that is that the English landed here in 1627 and colonized the island. So I'm just, in 2 years, we will be marking the 400th anniversary. So I'm just wondering how many sections of Barbados need to hear your presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think, wasn't there a English captain in 1625 that came to Barbados? Was it John Powell? Yes. You know what else happened in 1625? The Dutch proclaimed New Amsterdam a city or a town. So our two places, Manhattan and Barbados, are both considered, quote, founded. I put that in very strong quotes, 1625. Yeah.
Seth, we do have a question from our online
Fantastic.
audience that I'll read out. From Mark. He asked, during your research, did you come across any more direct links to Barbados and the UK?
So that's a great question. And there are tremendous links between Barbados and England or the United Kingdom that I absolutely ignored. My work is on intercolonial exchange, There is a tremendous just body of research on exchange between England, Great Britain, and Barbados and other islands that is not my field. My field is literally to look at what hasn't been done before. There have been some historians who started looking at what comes into Jamaica or what comes into Nevis or other places or what goes out. I believe I'm one of the first people to look at the flow back and forth. So this is tongue in cheek, at a cocktail party, when someone says, what was my dissertation on? My answer is, what did rum, sugar, and enslavement buy? I counted peas and onions. So you can't have a labor system on a plantation growing inedible food, sugarcane, or indigo, or cotton, or tobacco, and then you have to rely on the food somewhere else. I mean, in 1627, almost immediately after settlement, Barbados, the settlers are heading off to South America to find provisions. 1647, before my time period, the governor of New Amsterdam, Peter Stuyvesant, sails to Barbados to strike a trade deal with Barbados from Dutch New Amsterdam for exchange, for what he calls a trade triangle: New Amsterdam, Barbados, and Curacao. Well, 4 years later, trade between Curacao and Barbados is technically illegal, thanks to the Navigation Acts. Don't tell the people of Barbados that. Certainly don't tell the Dutch that. I mean, remember the Sylvesters. They're Dutch traders. So no offense to Great Britain. Other brilliant historians have tackled that.
Endangered servants that you spoke about, where did they come from?
Well, the majority were coming from Ireland and Scotland. They're coming from Ireland and Scotland. Yeah, they were indentured. They were indentured, and the transition here in Barbados from indentured servitude to enslavement is very quick. It's not my area of expertise, but I know we've had speakers here have done fantastic jobs. Professor from CUNY, Matthew Riley, yeah, has done fantastic work about the Irish indentured in Barbados. But that is not my area of expertise, but they were primarily Irish and Scottish. Yes, sir.
Hello. You spoke earlier about George Fox and
Yes.
the Quakers, and I wondered if you knew anything about the Braithwaite Quakers.
I'm sorry?
The Braithwaite Quakers, the family called Braithwaite. They were called the co-founders of the Quaker movement.
I don't. Dr. Carl Watson and I argued often about my exclusion of Quakers in my research. He argued for it, I argued against it, right up until last October. But I focused almost exclusively on those who were involved in the exchange with the middle colonies. That's really the core. I am a New York historian, and by expanding the New York history to Barbados and Barbados history to New York is my goal. So that is a family that I don't believe has ties to my area of research. So I would have, frankly, expedience and time said, not my subject. Sorry.
We have a couple more from our online audience. So we have two comments from Gilda. She says, go to the museum at Mount Gay in Bridgetown for more info. And fascinating, Dr. Camel. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have a couple of questions from Eugene. The population in the 13 colonies doubled every 2 to 3 decades in the days of sale and exploding market in which fortunes were made. In the days of sale, most passed through the Leeward Islands, the vast majority through Barbados. Was Barbados itself a provisioning stop for ships for all of those people? Wasn't the profit in the provisioning of ships with sugar, molasses, and rum as minor products of trade, Crop only lasts for a few months, but trade is 24/7.
There's a lot in that question. I would say that Barbados is an absolutely crucial inter-island provisioning place. That I think that especially with you had the English Navy based here, you had as military center, you had early stages Barbados being incredibly significant, but a lot of that shifted to Jamaica by the mid 18th century, especially with Jamaica's absolute massive size. But I wouldn't say that most ships came to Barbados. I would say that many would, but I also think that there, if you look at, I look at this exchange and trade like a really giant spider web. It's not a simple triangle. It's not a simple exchange. We had, some of my ships were dedicated. They would go Barbados, New York, back and forth. Others would go New York, Barbados, vanish for 5 years, and come back from Madeira. Well, according to historians, there was no New York to Madeira trade. I found a significant New York to Madeira trade. But you would have people shipping goods to Barbados, and they would go out, shipping goods to Curacao, and they would go out, to New York, and they would go out, which is how we have cacao being exported from New York. We do not have the climate to grow cacao, but we do have the warehouses to hold it and reship it. If that answers the question a little bit.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. You may have said it, but I may have missed it. Was the Sylvester surname rooted in the Jewish community? The
No.
Sylvesters? No. So most of the families that you shared tonight are not rooted in the Jewish community that had plantations in Barbados and interests in the United States?
Well,
in what became the United States?
Well,
in the Eastern Seaboard?
What I'm focused on were the plantocracy, which were not Jewish in terms of establishing plantations in North America. A whole other topic of Jewish merchants is the ebb and flow of people in a way that is a completely different pattern. But those were not planters who were having large labor systems here to generate the vast wealth of sugarcane and purchasing land to develop even greater wealth of provisioning. So it's a whole different, not exclusively more urban experience, but I will give an example of the Barbados beyond these few mentions I made of the Franks family and the Jacobs family. In New York, in Chinatown is the oldest Jewish cemetery in North America. And it is the second cemetery of the Jewish community. Technically, the Jewish community in Barbados was founded in 1654. We know there were Jews in Barbados before 1654. The Jewish community in New York is technically founded in 1654. We know there were Jews in New York before 1654. That's when the official community comes together. This cemetery in New York is created in 1683 to bury a Barbados Jewish merchant. So a merchant by the name of Mesquita, who is of Barbados, on a trade trip to visit his son based in New York, dies, his son buys the land, it becomes the Jewish cemetery, which ironically, Gershom Mendes Satius, the grandson of Grace Mears, he's also buried there as well. But the connections are incredibly deep, but on a completely different topic, mostly around the exchange of goods as opposed to this purchase and sale of human labor.
Thanks.
Uh-oh.
It's a really easy question.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask, I know you come up to a certain time period, but I'm quite interested in the idea of your research and your tour guiding experience and your public history experience. And the marketability of such a tour or such a kind of investigation, especially for Barbadians and West Indians in the diaspora in New York, who might be completely unaware of these connections to the very places that they live. And then also thinking about how that continues past your time period, which I was just wondering if you've been looking at those kinds of connections too. I know, like, my grandfather was born in New York in 1910, which is that kind of early wave of Barbadians moving to the US. And so I'm just wondering if there's something there in the narrative that could really be a benefit to the diaspora.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great question. Absolutely. The sites are scattered, but most of them are public. And we have over a dozen public sites of this connection to see within a 20-mile radius. Shelter Island is 120 miles away, so I can exclude them. There are sites absolutely possible to see. And it is really important because it isn't just Barbados, but as we delve into the interconnected history of Barbados and Jamaica, and Antigua was an incredibly large place of enslavement for New York. And all these other islands that are connected through history. And when you come to a place where I live, Brooklyn, which has a West Indian Day parade, which, if you're not familiar, on the first Monday of September, literally 1 million people march in this parade of West Indian heritage. It would be an incredible thing to do, and I think it's absolutely doable. And I also think that would be by its nature a ethnically, religiously, gender diverse experience. It would not be a tour of the plantocracy.
Hi, Seth. So we have a follow-up from Eugene. She
Great.
asks, wasn't Constant Sylvester a Quaker? Ditto the Roos family, also Middleton, Codrington, Drax, etc.
Well, I know that Nathaniel Sylvester was a Quaker. Yes, Rouse was a Quaker. But my point is that whether or not they're a Quaker is on a timeline not significant, because if they're purchasing Shelter Island in 1651, 1652, and George Fox's religion has not left England until 1655, is it relevant? That's my question. And it's a very controversial point, and a lot of people will find that to be very much in disagreement with me on that. But if there are a lot of analogies I could give that I won't give, but it is on a timeline, it seems it is important that they become Quaker, yes. But also, let's not forget that Lewis Morris was a Quaker, and Lewis Morris, and I chose not to put this in a slide, Lewis Morris was criticized for his abuse of enslaved workers by the meeting house, and his response was to convert his meeting house into an Anglican church. His nephew, Lewis Morris the Younger, based on his writings, had Quakerism imposed upon him so strongly that he ran the other direction very hard and very fast. So it's really complicated. I mean, Lewis Morris was a Quaker. He went to his grave a Quaker, but his church was Anglican because of criticism. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, thank you. We also have a question from Lynn. As Barbados was an inter-island base, did you find any trade in live plants, especially orchids?
Hello, Lynn from Trinidad. No, I did not find any live plants. I found pickled oysters. I found lots of other interesting things, and no, also, I have not found your pineapple yet. I have not found your first pineapple. I did find seasonal fruit coming here. One thing that I found that is really great were what I call the Christmas shipments. Middle of November, ships left New York with chocolates and live ducks, to arrive in Barbados at roughly the 2nd to 3rd week of December, so that the Christmas table in the planter houses could have duck. But really, the apples come at a certain time of year, the peas came at a certain time of year, everything flowed with the seasons. So unlike now where I can go to the store and get an apple here at Clifton Market in February, you would only see them at the right time of year.
A quick, sorry.
Oh.
It's connected to the Washington, Florida, Central Florida, because they had a lot of sugarcane plantations.
I have no idea. Florida is a foreign country to me. I mean that on many levels.
Seth, a quick one, and probably for much later, might not be your thing. What did Hackensack do wrong in 1921 to lose the romantic designation of New Barbados?
Because they thought the town, quote unquote, fathers felt that renaming the town for the romanticized and misspelled, mispronounced name of the indigenous person who sold the land to the proprietors was even more romantic than a tiny island in the southern end of the Caribbean.
Do we have any other questions?
Sorry, I had to throw romance back at you.
Sorry, just a question again about the Quakers. The idea of the Quakers being thrown out of Barbados for their treatment of slaves is because they treated them as if they had a heart.
That was in New Jersey.
A soul.
Morris was criticized in New Jersey, not in Barbados.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I honestly, I'll be very honest. I know very little about Quaker history anywhere in the world.
Well, the reason is that they wouldn't do anything like official documentation. So they wouldn't christen, they wouldn't marry, and they wouldn't attend church. So they were forced to, when they were kicked out of Barbados, they were forced to christen. So you have mass christenings of all Quakers, and then they were out of the country.
I'm just grateful, and I'm a superstitious person. I'm grateful that Dr. Watson didn't drop this light on my head for not, at this point. I appreciate all of you coming. The questions are great. I'm going to be honest, this is the first time I've ever presented this research. So I only got after a long hiatus, I only got my doctorate last October. So this is, speaking about this is also very new for me. So I apologize for any of my stumbles, but thank you for coming and giving me the encouragement to keep the process going. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. At this time, I'll invite Harriet back up to the podium to wrap up for us.
Thank you, Seth. I think I can say that we are quite honored to be the first audience for this presentation for your research. So thank you so much. We've learned quite a lot. Let's give Seth a round of applause. I think there's this saying in Barbados that wherever you go, you see a Beijing. And your talk tonight showed the deep connectivity between Barbados and New York and New Jersey. Sometimes we concentrate on the 20th century connections, but your talk was very, very illuminating. So thank you so very much again. I also want to thank the audience for being here, for participating, both the persons here in the Trevor Carmichael Wall Garden Theater, persons on Zoom, and those on Facebook Live. You've been a really good audience, so you can give yourself a round of applause as well. So we want to thank our director for the welcome remarks. our social history curator, Dr. Natalie McGuire, for chairing our session, and of course, our technical team, Brian, Travis, and Anastasia, for keeping us on point. And thank you all again for being here. Thank you, Seth. And I wish you all a safe journey home. And we now just invite you to join us at the back for some light refreshments.